Thanks for having me here tonight. I'm looking forward to taking you guys on this journey. It is high level, so you will find your way out within 20 minutes. So, what is TDD? Before I tell you what TDD is, I'm going to tell you a story. A couple years ago, when I first got my G2, I had to go pick up my car from Hamilton and drive it to Toronto, which I'd never driven a car on my own, and it was just like terrifying and nerve-wracking. So my mother offered to come along on the car with me so I wouldn't feel alone or I wouldn't be terrified. And I was like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. It wasn't. Because as you probably know with your parents, when you're in the car, she was constantly telling me everything I was doing wrong before I even did it, before I could see it. She's like, oh, you're too close. You're about to hit that car. You're off your lane. And I was like, seriously? I just really wish that I drove on my own at this point. Like, it felt better driving on my own at that point. And I feel like for some people, TDD is like my mother in that car. And I love my mother. But what TDD is, sticking to like a car analogy, when you're driving your car on the road, you have your brake system, you have your mirrors to allow you, so you're able to drive better, and you're actually more confident when you're on the road because of all of these systems to allow you to drive defensively. That's kind of more what TDD is. TDD, when you're working on, when you're going through a requirement, it formalizes the process of like breaking down all the different requirements in your system to simpler chunks that you can actually verify as you're trying to implement it. So how do you do TDD, in case you didn't know what it was? TDD actually works on three very basic principles. You write a failing test, then you write a test to make it pass, and then after that, you see ways to refactor. How does this look? So I actually created an example of FizzBuzz using TDD. And if you don't know what FizzBuzz is, it returns fizz when a number is divisible by 3, returns buzz when a number is divisible by 5, and it returns FizzBuzz when it's divisible by 3 and 5. If it's not divisible by 3 or 5, then it returns the number. And if you actually think about it, I've told you all the basic rules for how to implement FizzBuzz. What you do with TDD is you try and find what is the simplest thing I can implement right now. And that's just returning the number. So I would create a test and test that when I call this method, it returns my number, but that fails because I don't actually have the method yet. So now I create the file that includes my method, and I make it return the number, and now my first test is passing. And then as you keep going, you implement the rules for fizz and buzz and then FizzBuzz. And at the end of the day, you have your entire system, you also know it's working. And while you're going along with every test, you look at your system and think, do I need to refactor the test or do I need to refactor the production code? One thing I do want you to know is TDD doesn't actually tell you how to write tests. So if you're shitty at writing tests or you actually don't know how to write tests, then you kind of can't really do TDD at that point, right? What are the benefits of doing TDD? And I feel like this is really what's at the core and at the center of TDD is as you keep going through the process, you end up with a system that actually has a lot more tests in it, provided that the tests are actually going based on functionality. So when you're actually trying to get coverage, you're not just getting lines of code covered, you're actually getting functionalities covered as well. And because now you have coverage on those functionalities, you have less defects in your system. And because there is an important step of TDD, which is the refactor part, you're able to actually abide by a couple of like the software design principles, like keeping it simple and not overcomplicating your code system, your code base. And also when you're refactoring, you look for ways to not repeat yourself, right? And when people talk about testing, people are like, oh, you don't need to actually write code, you don't need to put comments in your code because the test is meant to be your code. With TDD, because your test is based on functionality, you actually understand what the code is doing by just looking at the test. And when you ship this code to production, you're very confident that it actually works as expected. And then my favorite part is I get to avoid that feeling, you know, like when you've written your entire system, you've developed it, and you're like, oh gosh, I need to actually write tests for this. Let's just ship it. We'll see how it works. You get to avoid that feeling because at the end of the day, you've actually gotten your test down. So now we're ready to start this journey. I'm gonna set the place. So I joined this company, and at the time when I joined, it had been like a couple months post-acquisition, And from like my interview and my first week on the job, I realized a couple of things about it. It had adopted some of the good parts of startup culture and some of the like horrible parts of startup culture, which is like ship fast. And at that point, the client is your tester, not necessarily your code itself. And with startups, obviously people leave, so people write code differently. And when they leave, they take some of that knowledge away. So because you don't have tests for it, you actually don't understand how the system works. You're just like, let me just make this change and see how it works. And it's kind of like that story of 99 bugs in the system, you fix one and there's 101 bugs in the system. So you're just in that constant cycle of constantly trying to squash bugs as you're releasing, which gets pretty exhausting. So when I got in at the end of my first week, I sent an email to my boss and I had like a full plan of what I wanted to do. We're gonna start with coding standards. We're also gonna put like the testing infrastructure and enforce test coverage so people actually cover the test, that cover the code they're writing. We're gonna also implement like a structured manual process so we don't actually release to prod without being sure like the essential part of the system works. And finally, I was gonna also like have this quality dashboard so everybody could see which systems were passing, what was going well. And it seems very ambitious for like someone on my first week on the job, which was really perfect. Like I really went in with my guns and I was just like shooting at everything, right? How did that work out for me? Well, kind of like this. It was not that good. Like I said already, I was new on the team, so I was actually trying to fully change the team culture, and the team was not necessarily about testing or quality. A couple of people on the team didn't actually understand how to write tests, so me trying to implement all this stuff was not working out for them, because then they started to increase the complexity of stories because they were like, oh, we have to write tests, so that kind of makes it like a 5 point instead of like a 1 point because you have to write tests, and it's like, no, that's not what it is. And I got like a lot of pushback from everybody. It wasn't really fun for a lot of people. And the one thing I wasn't really proud of was in trying to implement all of these procedures, I ended up breaking code in production, which is not good. Like that's a no way you're trying to actually implement a system and you're like, guys, this is good. We're gonna have less bugs and things are not gonna break in production, and it actually breaks stuff, which wasn't really good. So I learned a couple of things from that. One of the things I learned was I needed to communicate what I was doing because culture starts from the bottom up. I didn't have to just tell my manager the changes I was going to make. I needed to make sure all my team members were aware, and they also didn't just know what change was going to happen. I needed to explain the change for them so they actually understood the reasons why the change was happening. And then by doing that, I actually set up an open line of communication so we could actually discuss it. And they could actually like ask questions or give me feedback. And based on the feedback, I got to negotiate my system. So it wasn't going all the way from 0 to 100. We could start at maybe like 25 and then try and work our way up. And at the end of the day, like one of the things I found was really important was there were a couple of people that had been on the team for a while and understood the stress of trying to like ship things to production and having it break there. So those people actually helped me push my change forward, which was like really helpful for me. So what are we doing right now is we're still not fully doing TDD. I know I said I'm taking you on a journey, but we're still on this journey as well. But we do have stories that are going to our sprints that actually go with a TDD component. And as part of the stories going into our sprint with TDD components, we actually have a lot more people doing pair programming, which actually helps with like sharing knowledge. And pair programming is actually one of a good vital thing to actually for implementing TDD as well. And one of the final things that I am really like super proud of is right now we have weekly meetings where we talk about how to improve the way we write code, how to improve the way we write tests, how to understand the different parts in our system, and the team is actually communicating a lot better than when I first joined. So if you wanted to start this journey, which I highly recommend, I have a couple points for you. First, I want you to start with a clear vision. Like when I joined, my vision wasn't necessary to do TDD. Like I had done TDD a bit in the past, I knew about TDD, but I wasn't necessarily about TDD. I was just like, we need to have more tests, we need to have less defects. I was trying to target like a lot of the things you could actually get right off the bat from TDD. And when you're coming up with a vision, make sure it is smart, make sure you're specific, you can actually measure it, and you actually understand what makes it a success and what makes it a failure. And as part of doing that, you want to take inventory. Oops. Yeah, that's not good. You just think of this as like a flat tire. You take inventory of your system, and by system I mean like your organization. Who are the people on your team? What is their level in terms of like testing? How do they feel about this process that you're trying to implement? Who are the people that are going to be like your advocates and help you push your change forward? And who are the people that might need a bit of convincing, either by like telling them the benefits or teaching them how to do it better or things like that. And then finally, you want to actually leverage your team, because the best way to actually move things forward is if you come alongside your team members and not try and dictate the points to them. And one thing I have found, because I'm still on this journey, is it is like running a marathon, and I am very bad at running. But it's not like actually doing a sprint. And I feel like maybe marathons are actually more comfortable than actually sprinting, because you have a little bit of time to take breaks. Before I finish, I just have a question for you guys. As like the one takeaway from this is, which one would you rather do? Would you rather develop fast by not writing any tests or at all, and then ship your code fast by actually not going through any quality checks, but not being fully confident of what you were shipping to your customer or what you're shipping to production? Or would you rather develop slow by implementing TDD practices, and you can still ship fast because you've written tests, and then be fully confident that what you're pushing out to production is actually working as expected? Thank you. Any questions?
What applications or systems have you found that are hardest to test with TDD?
None that I've tried so far.
Nothing's hard?
Nothing that I have tried so far.
Okay.
Yes.
How big's the team that you rolled this out with?
When I started, we were about 7. Now we've probably doubled in that number, about 15. Yeah.
Kudos to you. That must have been really
Thank
hard
you.
to turn the team around, right? Like, what did you kind of stumble through it, or did you know that it was going to work in the end? Like, tell me about the turning point when you really screwed up and you kind of recovered.
I would say I kind of stumbled through some of it. I think probably the one turning point was the weekly meetings at that point, because we had a meeting in our calendar that wasn't necessarily getting used, and I took it upon myself to like try and get team members sharing, like volunteering them to actually share stuff. Yeah.
I would also like to commend you for doing with finesse what I have attempted to do with like a sledgehammer. But how do you sell this point to developers who ought to know better, but they refuse to? You know what I mean? How do you sell it to people who should know better?
Like which point?
I don't know. Like developers should know that this is the best way to do it, right? But even so, they're gonna still dig in their heels and tell you not. You know?
I mean, most times people are not comfortable with change. That's probably the most important thing. They might know the concept, but they're not comfortable trying it because it's easier to stick with what you know than try and venture into something new. Yeah.
That was a great talk.
Thank you.
How do you convince management that spending time on writing something that's not a feature is worth it?
My boss wanted it.
What did he say?
Well, I'm still the only software developer and test at my team. So I was hired because they really wanted to stop the process of like bug fixing when things got to production. So it was kind of like, it was a needed change, so it wasn't really much convincing. Because one of the things about when the velocity went down and some of the team members weren't happy about that, like my boss's boss was like, this is something we have to do, so we're gonna stick with it for now. Yeah.
Hi, so thanks for your talk, and I'm really curious because I'm a new developer, and I'm curious, how does one become a software developer focused on tests? Like, what's the path? Like, how did you become that?
I think it's a different path for everybody. For me, I was doing, like, my very first job right out of school, I was doing a couple of development, and we were doing manual testing, which is more like all hands on deck. And I wasn't really a big fan of the manual testing process. So when I moved to a new job where I got to like actually develop code that tests the system, I was really excited to take it up, and I just stuck with that.
Hi, thank you for your talk. You mentioned that you had a dashboard. So what metrics do you count in your dashboard?
I said it was an ambitious plan to have a
Oh, so
dashboard. We're still in the process of getting there. Right now, we only really like check code coverage. That's the one thing that's easy for us to test, and we have a separate system where we check the tests that we're running and which ones are passing or failing. We're still in the process of trying to integrate everything together.
Sorry, could you just elaborate on manual testing? Is that just like everyone go on the website and give it the thumbs up? Yeah, okay.
If you just go on the website and give it a thumbs up, that's a part of manual testing, which is more around exploration. So more manual testing is you actually write tests that gets functionality, and then you just run those tests. You have clearly defined steps, because that actually helps.
Cool, thank you.
No worries.
Were there any changes required for continuous integration process in your company? Like before you push code, do you run all the tests? Is it automated? Or what is the solution that your team used?
The team was actually already in a continuous integration process, which is pretty cool. One thing I did do was, like, as part of inserting some quality gate, we had pre-push hooks, which would add code base is JavaScript, so I was able to install Husky so they couldn't delete that part. It was actually an essential part of pushing, and then we added like linting and unit testing and all of that into like the build process, the build steps itself. Yeah. Thank you.